Welcome to Sutures and Cents, where Tegaderm meets top line and Surgiflow meets soft costs. In ambulatory surgery centers and hospital operating rooms, we talk clinical to business people and business to clinical people. I'm Mark Copeland. He's Ryan Pistone. We are Sutures and Cents. Ryan, this episode, we talk with Preston Alexander, who I think, if you remember the old Dos Equis commercials, I believe he's the most interesting man on LinkedIn. Brilliant writer, sort of a mysterious background, and talks about healthcare in a way that is so simplified. The economics of high-level healthcare that is so simple that I think he's an easy and interesting read for everybody. And so, I was really excited to interview him, and he did not disappoint.
No, not at all. I mean, I wasn't part of the interview, and listening to him it was one of my favorite. I love ones that I'm on, obviously, because I love myself. But
yeah,
no, he talks about things that for someone who's been involved, like I've been involved in healthcare a little bit less than you from an age.
Yeah. Yes.
An age part. Super interesting though. Made me think about things that I hadn't really. When he said it was like, oh yeah, no, that makes sense.
Right. Well, we'll jump into the interview where Preston Alexander, who went from being a product manager for surgical drapes to asking a philosophical question: are big healthcare systems just financial institutions who happen to take care of patients? So let's jump into the interview with Preston Alexander. All right. So we have our guest today, Preston Alexander. Preston, I wrote this down. You have taught me high-level healthcare finance, which does not come easily to me, I will tell you that. You've made me laugh. Your Sunday newsletter is must-read. And you taught me shooting the hooch. Never heard of that before. So welcome to Sutures and Cents. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Mark. Cope. I'm excited. Cope. I'm excited to be here.
Go by Cope. Thanks. We're even though we've never officially met in the same room, we're friends, and my friends call me Cope. Let's start with something you posted 5 days ago. You wrote, "Healthcare systems are financial institutions. They just happen to treat patients." We'll jump into a little bit of your history in that, but tell our listeners sort of how you came to that conclusion, generally speaking.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. That's a favorite one of mine. I started a few years ago looking often at health system financials, at their annual reports, quarterly reports, things like that. And I noticed in addition to, and this is sort of by the nature of financial reporting, but in addition to reading, 3 pages about operations and then 48 pages about, investments and pension plans and all the like accounting and finance stuff and raising bonds and all this financial stuff, I was like, this is kind of odd. This is sort of strange. And then it really sort of calcified when a couple years back, or last year or something. What is it? 2021. What's the year now? It's 2023. It's been a blur of the 3 years. I think we can all agree. But a lot of the health systems were reporting these insane losses. Ascension was my favorite example. They recently said they lost $3 billion in operating income. We'll see if that holds water. I haven't looked at the numbers yet. But they reported a $1.8 billion loss. And I looked, and the same year they made $1.7 billion in cash, and their investment losses were $1.2 billion. And I was like, why are we talking about a health system losing $1.8 billion when that really couldn't be farther from like the actual truth and reality of like, one, their operations, two, their cash production, and then a whole host of other reasons. So I just started really looking at the finances of these large health systems and realizing how much emphasis is put on investments, And I mean, you can see crazy line items like due to brokers, due from broker. And again, they have to report all this stuff. And you look at where their investments are in hedge funds and private equity and real estate. And I'm like, wow, how much time and effort does it take and how much resource does it take for Providence, for example, which last year sold over $12 billion of its investments and bought another $12 billion worth of investments. So that's 24 or 25 billion in investment transaction. And their patient revenue is something like $15 billion. So it just occurred to me, and I was like, what's going on here? Are these health systems just sort of like transforming? They just happen to treat patients these days, but really now their focus is somewhere else.
So, okay, so we all remember Ray Kroc saying, McDonald's isn't a restaurant business; it's a real estate business, right?
Yeah.
But I wasn't prepared to ask you this question. But what do you think? What's the rationale behind them? Is it just a hedge? Like, are we, or is it something else? I mean, I honestly I'm not leading I have no idea. What's your sense of it?
I think, with anything, and how the world turns and transforms is, without getting too tinfoil hat wearing, crazy person talk. I think that things just sort of evolve over time. So if we look at the health system and we look at the hospital and its evolution over time, there had to be, a lot happened, but there was definitely a point where hospitals and health systems started becoming much more financially savvy. And as nonprofit institutions wanted, or maybe more realistically, needed ways to grow, to serve more, and patient revenue or profit wasn't necessarily one, the only way, or two, maybe the best way, depending on the markets, of growing that money and then investing it. And they're nonprofit health systems. We leave them to produce community good, but they need a new MRI machine sometime. And the communities they serve depending on a payer mix, maybe they don't really support having $2.5 million laying around for a new GE MRI, whatever you need. So how do they do that? So, well, maybe, they're pretty good operationally. Their margins aren't great, but, they're nonprofits, so they're making 3%, 6% on good days. Some of them are way worse than that. And what do you do with that excess money? Well, interest rates have been zero for the last, over 10 years, 15 years now. So borrowing money is a pretty good deal, especially if you're cash flowing and your operations are strong. And then investing in the markets. We've been are there bear markets anymore? I don't even know. We've been in a bull market for forever. And with so many financial instruments available, I think that it just became a really, frankly, it's a smart way to leverage what you have, what you can produce operationally, to grow the business. I mean, nowadays it's like, I'm saying it because it's like, it is to grow the business. Maybe once upon a time, it was to serve more, to support your infrastructure, to reinvest in the capital required. I think it's just evolved. We go through these step changes, right? And then you go out and you want a better CEO who's done more, who's whatever. Well, to attract the best talent, the argument goes, you have to pay more, you have to be competitive. And so just so many factors led to this sort of stepwise evolution where hospitals now operate firmly in financial markets, as financial institutions. And not all of them, for sure. I say it with a little tongue in cheek, but that happened to treat patients on the side.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, it's. I'm not a tinfoil hat person. I tend to look at things sort of almost super objectively, and I think if your health, whatever you are, if you start to get to a point of growth and economic size and scale, you become a financial institution by happenstance, and then you have a risk that you have to manage, and because you're just like, you could be Apple or you could be UPMC. You're enormous institutions where hundreds of thousands and maybe millions of people are working or rely on, and that needs to be, in many ways, that needs to be protected against a pandemic or a market drop, because so many people rely on it. I don't know whether it's good or bad. I don't know. I just never. You got me sort of realizing how big these institutions are. I see it on the ground. I see health systems that used to be 2, 3 hospitals are now 25, 30, and have partnerships, and so it's interesting. And I just never really thought about it that way until you start putting some of your posts up, and I'm like, hey, I never even would have thought to look there, much less I never heard anybody even talk about it until I started reading you on LinkedIn. So, I took your course, still struggle, but I took your course and I liked it. It taught me some things that I'm still an old dog, but I'm still trying to learn new tricks. How did you? So I don't think anybody who thinks you're a tin foil wearing person, other than yourself, is missing the boat. I think you're just shining a light where a lot of people don't necessarily look. But I mean, I heard somebody joke a couple weeks ago. Like they're saying, like, oh yeah, hey, healthcare is 18% of the GDP in the United States, and he's like, and everybody has health. Like it's like everybody has pants, everybody has health. Like it doesn't. There's no one it doesn't affect. So, how did you tell me a little bit about your history? I'm fascinated by how you got your voice. You have a voice, and you didn't just get there. You've been in med device for a couple of years. Tell me how you started and how you got here.
Yeah. Well, no, I appreciate you saying that, and thank you for taking the course too. I'm glad you liked it. The hot pink didn't throw you off too much. But so I started, yes, in medical device totally by accident. I graduated college. I did a lot of like random things, rock climbing and furniture building, and built interiors of private airplanes, which was pretty cool for a little while. Built some spy plane doors once. That was kind of interesting. Yeah, I know. And then I was like, oh, I really like business. I want to get into it. I would, when I was doing private planes and like doing something, I just always was drawn to the business side of it, in addition to the craft. But I'd failed at some businesses that I had started before, and I was like, maybe I should learn a thing or two. So in a 2009 job market, it wasn't like sort of ideal. So 2010, it was still like hard for a psych grad who built furniture to go like march into a corporation and be like, I want a job. Really, my goal was to learn, wasn't really to like get a job. So I enrolled in an MBA program, sort of hacked my way in. Actually, my goal was to sort of funny now. I was going to apply, hopefully get in. I applied to state school. It's a good school, but state school, and just take a course because I was like, this is fine. But if I put MBA candidate on my resume, I felt like people would take me much more seriously, which was I know, fun. That's a hack for all the young listeners out there. But it didn't work out that way because I was super fortunate and got offered a scholarship, and so I just went full time. But as I was applying to different jobs after I was finishing my coursework, I just happened to get a job. Super lucky at a medical device, really big company with a small med device division. I literally had no idea what they did. They made surgical.
Who was the company?
It was a small division of a big company, made surgical drapes, and I went into the interview and I literally said, "So what's a surgical drape?" And they explained it, and I said, "That's interesting." I said, "Why do we need those? Like, what are those for?" Like, I mean, I just, and somehow, I don't know what it was. Maybe my socks, because my sock game is super strong. They hired me. And I was a product manager for a couple of different like business lines. I did a DVT compression system, and then worked my way up in the device rankings. Went to another company, a wound care company, was a product manager there as well for increasingly sized portfolios. And it was around that time that I started getting a lot more exposure because you come from the OR world, and you like the reality is that in the purview of healthcare, the life of a guy in the OR is a very small portion of all of total healthcare. And we sold surgical drapes. Like you talk about like a really small slice of everything. When I went to the wound care company, it opened my eyes to this much broader healthcare ecosystem. We started talking about reimbursement, HCPCS codes, long-term care, skilled nursing facilities, how care gets from the hospital down, out to the post-acute, what's home health, like all this stuff. Like I learned what like an ACO is, kind of. They still confuse me half the time. And I was just like, this is fascinating. I want to learn just more about healthcare. I like the business, the devices. It was interesting. But until then, I was like, it wasn't about like healthcare for me. It was just about the business strategy. And it was interesting. And then it became about healthcare. And I thought to myself, how can I learn more about like healthcare broadly? And I took to LinkedIn. I went to social media, to the socials, and I started reading articles. Mostly I read Modern Healthcare because I like accidentally paid for like a year subscription, which is like $200. And I was like, well, I got it. I might as well use it now. And so I'd read an article and I'd post the article on LinkedIn. This is old school LinkedIn algorithms. And then I would write what I thought about it. And it wasn't really to like tell the world what I thought. The goal and the hope was that, how social media is. I wanted all the real people who really knew what they were talking about out there to tell me why I was wrong. And I knew they would. And they did.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And,
You don't have to worry about that.
No, exactly. It was like, I wanted the opinions. I wanted the doctors. I wanted the nurses. I wanted the administrators and the people working in it. Because I felt so peripheral in all of healthcare as like a device product manager, one band of this whole thing. And that's all I did for a couple of years. I just, and it's funny to think about just like the response of what it was. And then I don't totally remember when it was, but I remember like the moment kind of that like it switched and I decided that I wasn't going to post my interpretations anymore, that I now had formed opinions about healthcare. And that I now felt like I knew enough to really start talking about it. Because throughout that whole time period, I mean, I'd have video calls and I'd talk to doctors and I'd just say, tell me about what you do and what it's been like. And, what's it like to sell a practice and how's private equity affected you? And, like I just asked a lot of questions and what it's like working in the hospital and understanding, moral injury versus burnout. Like I wanted to know all of it. And I spent 2 to 3 years probably just trying, like, it looked like I was just talking a lot, but I was really just doing it as like a beacon to learn. And I learned a lot and then decided, okay, I've learned a lot. I've done some other interesting things. Like actually, I didn't just learn, I actually did some stuff too. Now I'm going to talk about it and say what I think is, and follow my interest paths and connect my own dots and say what I think. And that's what I've been doing, I guess probably for the last like year and a half. It's been me talking about what I see and what I think.
So it's just been a year and a half, you think, from the timeline?
Well, a year and a half of like me, of like, as you say, which I really appreciate, of my voice being out there and writing in my voice. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because that's interesting. I would have thought it was longer than that for whatever reason. And maybe that's because it seems like the pandemic bent time, but also, I don't know. It just, I had this sense of it. You talked to so many people and you asked so many questions. But you know what I'm fascinated by is the fact that you don't come across as somebody when I talk to you who's provocative. But when you would post articles and comment on them, knowing that you're going to hear back from people, you are sort of provoking. And not in a negative way. You're provoking response to learn something, to get some information, to get course corrected or validation of what you're thinking. And that takes a pretty confident individual, right? I mean, is that how you describe yourself?
No one's ever asked me that before. So it's funny because I don't know that for me at least, like how I think about it, it doesn't necessarily come from a place of confidence, but it came from a place of just like real earnest desire to learn. Like I tell people all the time, like, please tell me where I'm wrong. Tell me why I'm wrong. I want, like, if I'm wrong, I'm okay. Like, I don't care at all. It used to get me real worked up about like being wrong. I had this like perfection frame and I wanted to like get an A plus, you know? But now I'm like, okay, explain that to me. Tell me what I'm missing. Like, help me understand better. And it really came not from like a confidence, but from like just wanting so bad to learn, like that was the end goal, that it didn't require confidence at all, because like the flip side of confidence is insecurity, but I wasn't insecure in it because I didn't care, because I knew that I didn't know.
Right.
Like, so I wasn't insecure. I was like, I'd say something like, not, hey, I really want to learn this, you know, showing maybe an insecure side or a lack of, I just said it knowing that I'd get something back, and I wasn't insecure because I knew I was probably wrong. I knew I was probably missing something. And like, that was the point, was just like real life world feedback. So to me, it wasn't confidence or the flip side. It was just like, I just want to learn. Just tell me.
Interesting. It doesn't surprise me. Somebody who writes and talks like you do has to sort of just be so curious that it's going to make you dive into those financial reports and figure them out. I mean, so, you know, it's interesting. How did you? Before I jump to another question, I wanted to ask you, when you started doing that, did you think you were going to get? I mean, you see Twitter, and you see people just like, I mean, it's just like a buzzsaw sometimes, right? Did you get a lot of that? Or because LinkedIn's more professionalism, let's call it, people were less likely? When I started posting regularly, I was sort of like, okay, bring it. You know, like it's actually been very, very little of that. But much more people sort of being affirmative of it, and I was just curious, like, what was your expectation? And then what did you experience?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't remember exactly like what I expected. I can tell you right now that there's a grand total of like 2, maybe 3 people that I've blocked on LinkedIn, because like I'll do some blocking. I don't mind. There's like one guy. His name's Richard. He's a real character. And you know, they just like, it's like no matter what, like you'll never say anything right. And like the way and it's unfortunate because there's certain people and I've tried to dialogues and I'm like, help me understand. Please tell me what I'm missing. Like I'm trying, you know, and then the response is usually like, you wouldn't understand. I have 30 years of experience and what do you know, you know? And I get shade from some people sometimes, like they probably think I don't see it, but I see it. It's fine. But in those early days, like, yeah, LinkedIn is not the cesspool that is Twitter or X nowadays. Right. Like, because, you know, I tell people, would be like, what's your favorite social media platform? And I say LinkedIn, and they're like, what? It's so boring. And I'm like, what? That's where I mean, Twitter's gotten better, but I'm like, you can learn so much on LinkedIn. And like, it's, you know, it's the professional crew. And then it became something other than just like the place where you go look for a new job or like post your resume kind of a thing. It became the people trying to learn in the professional industry that they're in and content around that. And so I didn't know what the expectation was. I just knew that it was the right place because like my inkling was that you can share articles. It seemed easier. Twitter like overwhelmed me. Facebook was like weird it was about college, and I have like questionable pictures on there. And like LinkedIn was like just much better place to do it. And like I said, I can count. I know their names and exactly who like I have blocked and don't interact with on LinkedIn. And 99.99% of people are great.
Yeah. It feels to me like I never thought of this until you were just describing. It's almost like a professional online trade show where you're walking around people's booths, you're talking, some people, and I used to tell people that in med device, sales training was a little bit different than the sales training I got in other industries. The best sales training I got was at the bar after the sales. At the end of the day, I would pick out, like, I know him, I know her, I'm going to go buy him a drink, and I'm going to say, you got to tell me how you're doing that, because I'm going to learn. And, salespeople salespeople like to help. So the collaboration and exchange of information and technique and knowledge is so common at those meetings that I would go to the sales meeting not to listen to what the company said. It was to go and turn to a couple other people I highly respected and say, let's just talk afterwards, and you tell me what we should do. And then you get older and you get some experience, and then people are doing it with you, and you're like, oh my gosh, I must be doing something right. But that's what sort of LinkedIn feels like to me, and in a good way.
All right, so we just finished the first half of the interview with Preston Alexander. I'm sure you're going to tell me what you found most interesting, but for me, Cope, it was the fact that healthcare institutions really are financed. Healthcare systems are really financial institutions. When he threw out the fact about Providence, selling and buying like $24 billion worth of investments. And when he explains why they do it, it makes complete sense.
Yes, and then $15 billion.
I don't know what you thought.
Yeah, it was just, and I may have, I'd never thought about it that way. And Preston, because he's an interesting fella and a great writer, makes you think about things differently, and that's why I was so excited to talk to him. And I now do think I do look at now annual reports in health systems that I call on to try to understand some of this stuff, all because of him. And
nerd.
All right. Well, Ryan, I think it was a really interesting episode, and I cannot wait for the second part of it. But until then, because the saying "all bleeding stops eventually" applies to both surgical patients and healthcare balance sheets, we'll see you next time on Sutures and Cents.